welcome to this session. I'm going to be hosting for everyone here. I'll kick off into this deck a little bit. So just before I get started with some of the content, I want to just quickly introduce myself. My name's Dominic Constandi. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success over at ZoomInfo. To provide some context, what we do here at ZoomInfo is assist our customers in developing and optimizing their go-to-market mechanisms by providing incisive data and tools through which they can better identify and engage their next customer. So with that sort of high-level overview of the org, I'll sort of speak a little bit to some of the content now. So the title, obviously, of the session is Using Sales and Marketing Data to Create a Connected Customer Experience. So I think all the folks tuning in probably leverage data to different degrees, different levels of sophistications. A lot of it depends on the maturity of your organization. I mean, here at ZoomInfo, we're about $350 million of recurring revenue. We're about 1,400 people sort of globally. So I'd say a relative level of maturity, but nonetheless, I think a lot of the concepts that hopefully we can cover today will not only be sort of conceptual and philosophical, but hopefully some good tactical takeaways as well. Because I've attended sessions like these, and the thing I always want to know about is how can I go and do something now? What do I go and action on next Monday morning? So hopefully there'll be some good tidbits of kind of tactical takeaways here, and that's what we've tried to kind of scatter through some of this material. So without further ado, I will get us going. So first up, customer success teams must rely on key and connected data too. And you guys can all read as fast as I can talk, but essentially it's about mapping and optimizing the journey, understanding that sort of relationship map at each of our customers, leveraging the real-time intelligence to identify and sort of deploy our strategies and our engagement model and keep iterating on that. And then finally, we're going to touch a little bit upon sort of firmographic, technographic kind of scoring models to mitigate churn, identify opportunities. And I know that this is that's a topic in and of itself that we could probably do an entire presentation on. But I will try and keep my yabbering to the allotted time here. But yeah, let's dive in. So our beloved customer journey slide. So I'm sure that most of you here have seen any number of iterations of this, and all of them probably equally valid, all of them specific to your business or your product or your sort of your service that you guys are offering. I think broadly speaking, we can always categorize into the land, adopt and engage, and expand and retain. You can call it different things. There might be different nomenclature, but really these are sort of a crude assessment of what that customer journey could look like. Now, as we think about data in this, I've got some handy dandy sort of colored dots there that sort of delineate what sort of data insight we might be getting at each of these phases. But really, these phases or these blocks delineate the sort of activities and engagement that we're having with customers at each stage of those top line journey segments. So as we sort of look at it, what are some of the things that data allows us to do at various stages of this customer journey or this life cycle? Now, this is certainly not exhaustive. This is certainly not applicable for everyone, but just thematically, I'll just run through a couple of key examples. So, for example, here at ZoomInfo, one of the first places that we really start thinking about data, collecting the data, actioning the data, building motions off of the data, is really in that land phase. And a lot of folks might think, but that's sort of the sales world, right? We're post-sales, but the data that we can collect there through sort of that sales mechanism, through the solution scoping, really helps set us up to kind of to engage the customer in a really personalized and sort of bespoke way, and frankly drive that time to value more quickly. So within the technical evaluation phase, for instance, or the solution scoping, we would say, okay, well, one of the things at ZoomInfo we do here is integrate with our customers' CRM tools, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, and any of these kinds of tools, as well as integrate potentially with a customer's enterprise marketing tool. So, for example, an Eloqua, something like, or a Marketo, something along those lines. So, really, those integration points and understanding that tech stack, understanding that sort of the technology landscape our customers have, really gives us a jump on the onboarding. And what that allows us to do is, as we go into the onboarding, we have specific motions that are triggered and frankly precipitated by sort of the customer's tech stack and tech landscape. So, for example, if I know that this customer had heavy Salesforce user, that's that integration with their CRM system there is going to be a really key functional part of deriving value from our tool. We have our onboarding team, our integrations team, our implementation group sort of kickstart the motions and sort of the integration plays and start sort of conducting that business requirements analysis around how the customer uses Salesforce. What sorts of things do they do in the system? How is it set up so that we can make sure that as we go into that process, that's front and center for us. And we know that, okay, this is a really key part of the value driver of them, engaging us is potentially the way that we can help make their Salesforce or their CRM sort of integration and interaction even more productive. It also means that we talk about a seamless customer experience, right? We talk numerous examples about sort of the criticality of that first impression, the criticality of the analogy I always like to give that is pretty well trodden at this point is the hotel check-in, right? Hotels always spend the most amount of money on making their lobby look fantastic, and sort of the staff at the front desk are always super attentive and helpful, and that's because it's that first moment of truth. It's that first impression, and when your reservation is at their fingertips and they know all of your stay preferences, the floor you like, sort of near the elevator or not, etc. You feel like sort of that is a much more seamless experience. It kickstarts your journey, with that hotel off on the right foot, and sort of anything that happens from then on, you're looking at it through sort of through rose-tinted lenses, hopefully. And that's the same way we think about onboarding. So the ability for us to be able to sort of understand and know exactly what it is that's going to matter to them, demonstrate that in the kickoff call, demonstrate that in how we interact with them, and sort of what we lay out in terms of a sort of an implementation plan, and sort of how deliverables is really key. I'm not going to spend too much sort of more time on the slide. We've got a lot to cover, but essentially, even through the adopt and engage phase, through the relationship management, we're going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But understanding, using the data to understand the org chart, right? Understanding sort of the personnel landscape, right? Sort of who is my MPOC, who is my financial buyer, what's that group that currently isn't signed on for us, but we really want to think about and get to and engage. What are my user personas and how should we sort of engage those differently, and what sort of the use cases are, how do we build our solution to tailor to them? All of this, if you have that data ahead of time, you can start building plans and you can start making sure that these are key milestones, whether it's sort of stuff that you're communicating to the customer in your project plan, or whether it's something that you internally just have sort of tabs on that I need to make sure that I'm engaging this type of user persona. I need to make sure that I'm expanding and sort of demonstrating potential value to this group that isn't too familiar with us yet. I need to make sure that my financial buyer is aware of the value we're providing and that I'm getting in front of them on a regular cadence and sort of building that relationship. I need to make sure that my MPOC is empowered to continue to drive adoption. All of these things, critical for your relationship mapping and your relationship management. That leaks into expansion, and your ability to essentially kind of drive to renewal, and continue to expand your footprint. Adoption and value realization. Again, I think that's self-explanatory, right? Especially within that sort of SaaS product world, understanding how your customers are engaging the product and your services, understanding, hey, I always thought that this particular piece of our system was going to be a key value driver, and I'm just not seeing the usage. What's going on there? So your ability to sort of not only be sort of proactive in how you're engaging the customer, but also reactive and sort of iterating on what's working, how you're engaging, what's not. Even things like training and production support, and we're missing probably a little colored dot there. But one of the main sort of feedback inputs that you get from customers around their experience and around sort of what they're using, what they're struggling with, what they're trying to kind of to sort of optimize, is that one of those key vectors is actually through your production support and your customer support team. They are the front lines, and they're the ones that hopefully are also kind of collecting data around sort of the emails, the phone calls, the volume, the topic. What are the challenges they're facing? Are some of them endemic? Are some of them repetitive? Is there something that we should be looking at in terms of root cause? Does it signal something that we need to get ahead of? Does it signal whether that thing be sort of a positive thing of, hey, they're asking more questions around X, Y, and Z. That could be an opportunity to have another conversation about a different part of the product. Or is it sort of potentially signaling sort of revenue that might be at risk, right? Where gosh, they're really struggling to adopt, or we haven't set this up the right way because they keep kind of running into these roadblocks, or maybe there's sort of bugs in the system. But regardless, that's another key vector through which you can collect data, internalize it, build motions that are hopefully predictive as well as reactive, automated as well as manual and bespoke, to sort of improve that journey experience. And obviously that sort of filters through to renewal. So that's sort of a scatter shot of that journey, but we'll sort of dive in now sort of to how we can iterate through this engagement using data. So this is, again, still sort of part of that journey, but here you can see kind of through that handy dandy arrow, sort of how you move through your engagement model, iterate on it based on the data you have. So really quickly, I'm just going to kind of sort of talk about how we think about it here at ZoomInfo. So first of all, we think about grouping the accounts for action, right? We're going to come up with some static analysis and say, okay, for this particular type of customer that uses this type of our product with this frequency, or has this sort of spend appetite, or is this segment, however you all sort of individually segment your customer base, that you're going to think about that segmentation, and that segmentation is going to drive your engagement model, right? And sort of the operating level agreement that you sort of have internally to sort of best service that cohort of customers. And sort of coming out of that, once you identify that, you're going to have hopefully a set of prescriptive actions, right? You're going to say, okay, based on my engagement model, these are the prescriptive actions that we believe is going to drive the best time to value, give them the best experience, and allow us to sort of kind of continue to expand and deepen our relationship. So those prescriptive actions could be proactive, they could be reactive, right? So I might say, just as an example, we see a customer, so we've grouped a list of accounts where we've seen a drop off in usage in the last 30 days training, for example. And we would say, okay, gosh, we've seen a drop off in usage in this part of the platform, which we know is a key driver for the customer. And we want to be really prescriptive and sort of responsive to that sort of that drop off or that disengagement. So, okay, first you've got that data. We've then decided, you've identified a cohort, you've got the data around it, you're now going to have some prescriptive actions. So what are those prescriptive actions? You might delineate them, obviously different playbooks for different customers and different companies and different products, but ultimately that prescriptive action that says, I am now going to run these series of plays or run this motion that hopefully is going to sort of ameliorate the situation or the risk that we see in that drop in engagement. Okay, and then and hopefully is going to, what we believe is going to drive a better outcome for us and the customer. So then we move to that next stage, which we've prescribed those actions to our CSMs or our account managers. Now, what's the adherence to those actions? So you now have got your, you've got this sort of dashboard. Essentially, what we have is, okay, well, these are the things that we think we should be doing. I mean, everyone calls it something different: call to action, prescriptive action, but this is the playbook. How do we as an organization adhere to those things? Well, what's the level of fidelity? What is the sort of the quality in which we execute those prescriptive actions? So we look at that adherence at ZoomInfo and we say, okay, we are A-OK, we are on point, we are executing these with quality, and we are moving forward with precision and pace. Then we look and say, okay, so what are the actions to those outcomes, right? So we say, okay, well, what are the outcomes to those actions? So we say, okay, so we've completed the prescribed actions with 90% fidelity. Excellent, well done. We can all pat ourselves on the back, but did that matriculate and precipitate a positive outcome? Did that have the desired impact, right? And so we might say, well, gosh, none of these KPIs have moved. Okay, well, we need to potentially sort of cycle back and think about what those actions were and if they're the right actions. Flip side, yes, they had the desired outcome. We then will take a look at comparative outcomes and say, and then this is part of that outcome analysis, right? Where we can say, okay, so did we see the KPIs move? And do the KPIs just move organically, right? What is the delta that we can attribute to these actions that we've taken? So comparative outcomes, kind of essentially A/B testing, right? What for the control group that we did nothing with versus the group that we really targeted? Did we move the needle above and beyond an organic rate of change, right? And if you can say yes to that, then excellent. You run that motion again because you found value. And if not, then you cycle back and you rethink your prescriptive actions. And obviously that comes out of that final phase there, which is the customer journey reporting. Every organization does it differently. Here at ZoomInfo, we've got some pretty rigorous sort of reports that we can run that allow us that show us the results of that A/B testing, that show us sort of the value of that motion, and sort of indicates to us, hey, you should keep at this clip. This is pretty good. You're sort of seeing a good ROI on this activity, or hey, you know what? This ROI is tremendous. The amount of effort and resources we've thrown towards this sort of motion compared to the outcomes we're driving is tremendous. So let's double down. Or you're saying, gosh, I gave up a lot of people or a lot of time or a lot of resources to really move this, and it's just not having the desired outcome. Okay, so then you can kind of like continue to circle back. But all of this is driven by data, right? So much of what I always kind of call customer success a little bit, it's like economics. It's a bit like the dismal science, right? It's you can sort of attribute things. Sometimes it can be murky. It can be a little bit nebulous. There are so many variables, but the more that you can be precise and focus on what the data is telling you and not just what makes common sense or what just feels right, you can hone in and better calibrate your motions and make sure that, the scarce resources that we all have, I don't have infinite CSMs, infinite support people, infinite implementation people, but the actions we're taking are the right actions and they're the ones that drive the most outcome. So next slide. We've sort of talked here a little bit about understanding the customer landscape, sort of with org charts. I mentioned it before. So you can understand it with org charts. You can understand it with any type of visual graphic you want. I mean, here on the screen, I've got sort of a screenshot here from our system that essentially kind of shows you a handy dandy org chart and so reports to so. Really, the spirit of this is sort of, as I mentioned earlier, is understanding your user personas, understanding where you are strong and have deep relationships, but also understanding sort of where there is a dearth of that engagement, right? People talk about the danger of being single-threaded, right? The number of times I've seen us sort of be in sort of risky sort of churn situations because we felt like we knew the right person. That person was a champion, but oh my goodness, there's this other person and they're the ones who are the decision makers and we haven't been in front of them, right? I mean, this is a story that probably rings true for so many that are tuned in right now. But the key here, being able to visualize and see it and be really deliberate about it, right? Being able to say, as a management team or as a leadership team, or even at the individual contributor level, being able to say, all right, this is my book of business, or this is my landscape at this particular customer. And how am I doing, right? And then from that, setting really targeted goals and saying, all right, well, I've got no presence here. This month, I'm going after it. This quarter, I'm going to deepen my footprint here. I'm going to expand my relationship there. But again, seeking those additional points of entry for expansion, looping in the right stakeholders on the important initiatives and identifying the real decision makers. These are all kind of the buzzword terms. But fundamentally, what we've seen, and especially, in the last 6 months, is how quickly businesses change, how quickly the data changes. And so you want to make sure that you are constantly pulsing your customer base, be it through some automated system, sort of what we use, versus even just kind of being really high touch and really proactive and sort of doing that relationship mapping exercise with rigor and frequency. That's going to help you obviously be multi-threaded, have more valuable conversations, be speaking to the right people at the right time. Increasing that engagement and closing coverage gaps. So this is sort of a part 2 to that concept, right? So here you can see, we've got a handy dandy graphic and you're wondering, gosh, that just looks like a rainbow sort of, a rainbow Jackson Pollock painting. And it is to some extent some of that, but really, this is a very kind of fancy solution. It doesn't have to be this, right? I mean, this is what it is for us, but essentially there on the left, you can see the people at our organization, people on the right, people at the customer, and the interaction and sort of lines of communication and thread that have been happening over the course of X time period that you select. And you can kind of like drill down and see what that looks like. Now that's very sophisticated. almost everyone, I imagine, who's tuning into this will have some sort of system where they're able to sort of track interactions, able to track engagement that they're having with different contacts, or just even at the high level, at the account level. I'm sure most folks will have something along those lines. So really kind of digging in and capturing that critical data from your customer-facing teams in your CRM. Understanding where the contacts are, what meetings are happening, what the email history looks like, mapping those activities to see a timeline, right? And I talked about that sort of relationship mapping exercise being multi-threaded. Here, this is something where you can say, okay, well, I first assessed where I have relationships, the depth of those relationships, the quality of those relationships. This is now the piece of where am I missing, or where am I nailing it, right? Where do we have just constant day-to-day sort of interaction with one sort of point of contact, but nothing elsewhere? So this kind of allows you to take a pretty critical look at, frankly, like what's going on in terms of how you're engaging with sort of that customer or your customer base. Now, again, this looks like a very nice graph, and you'd say, well, this is very lovely, and I have this data. But again, as I sort of mentioned at the top, data is great, but if data doesn't drive kind of tactical motion, or doesn't drive action, or allow you to sort of come to work on a Monday and say, I'm going to try something, I'm going to try this, and I think this is going to drive an outcome. Then data is just data, right? It's just navel gazing at that point. So really thinking here and saying, okay, thinking critically and saying, all right, I've got this data, this wonderful graphic or whatever else we're using, but where is it showing me that sort of I don't have the footprint I need, or where am I gaining momentum? What accounts is this colored sort of chart? Where is it just frequent and really dynamic and explosive, indicating we're gaining momentum at account, and the account is engaging with us more and more, they're interested in what we're doing, versus where is this looking really sparse and threadbare, and indicating, oh my goodness, we're losing momentum, we're losing velocity of engagement here, we need to double down our efforts. Or maybe why? Let's think about what that looks like. Which MPOCs are sort of pulling away, right? So again, using the data to think about where am I mapped with sort of key points of contact. Changing gears now, we're going to think about driving expansion a little bit through account-based campaigns. Now, depending on the makeup of your org, depending on how you're structured and what you do, and customer success, has sort of so many different charters and purviews depending on the business itself. But something worth touching upon is sort of this idea of driving expansion with account-based campaigns and using data to do that. And to the extent that your success team or your account management team is engaged in that, this kind of could be a useful touch point. So thinking about data around your account selection, so aligning yourself around the most valuable and strategic accounts to target, right? So it's saying, okay, well, if I'm trying to drive a campaign for a buyer intent sort of a product, who are the customers based on geography, based on persona, based on size, right? Is your product or is your particular offering you're looking to drive an account-based campaign around? Is that is it more tailored towards the enterprise? Is it more an SMB type sort of play that you're trying to run? So not only understanding by segment, understanding by usage, understanding by spend cohort potentially, understanding by geography, understanding by industry. So all these things allow you to create really targeted account-based campaigns that aren't just kind of scattershot, hey, entire customer base, this is what we're doing. I'm going to talk about it a little bit in the next slide, but that in the last 6 months, especially in a COVID era, there's a lot less, you're going to get a lot less, far less optimal results in doing that. I think that, there are some interesting stats around sort of inbound emails since in this COVID era that really mean that you've got to be tailored and you've got to be targeted. Then thinking about tactical implementation, right? Aligning around the most valuable and strategic accounts. So again, let's not just be scattershot. Let's think about being really targeted with how sort of what we're including in terms of the content, right? Am I pitching a solution, or am I pitching it in a way that is going to resonate with sort of the cohort of customers I'm looking to impact? And then finally, the infrastructure support, aligning around sort of the data that shows whether it's effective or not, right? So again, that idea of constantly iterating based off of your data. I thought a thing would work. I did a thing. Did it work when I A/B test it? Yes, no, maybe. And then you iterate. Was my account selection wrong? Was my content and tactical implementation wrong? And then that, again, you just keep iterating. And this is, sometimes it takes multiple cycles to get right. But again, you've got to constantly be honing, constantly be looking to get more precise as you're sort of looking to campaign against your customer base. Coordinated campaigning, I'm going to spend a couple of seconds here, but this is a big chart. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of different plays, Facebook ads, close sales alignment, SDR plays, email marketing, direct mail. The most sophisticated organizations don't get all of this right. They don't do all of it, and they certainly probably aren't even linking it together. I mean, we at ZoomInfo, I'd like to think that we do a lot of good things. We do a lot of things right, but I mean, I could not sit here with a straight face and say that we connect every single piece of this perfectly. Start where you can. This is really, sort of something that you should use as a North Star, right? Pick pieces that you can connect. Okay, I should be thinking about connecting my direct mail motion with my email marketing, right? These are two things that probably should go hand in hand. They probably should be linked in some way. That's maybe where I'll start, because that's what I can do, right? Thinking about, gosh, is there anything that's conflicting? Is my email marketing conflicting with my SDR plays? Are they calling into the same type of customer with different messaging, and thus kind of confusing our value prop, right? So really just identifying where you can create those basic links, build off of those basic links, and try and eliminate the places where you're creating confusion or you're delivering conflicting type messaging. But again, using data to think about how you're engaging your customers through these multiple channels, assessing the success of those things and where you're getting value. I mentioned that I'd be talking about an interesting stat. That interesting stat is, in the last 6 months, or certainly this year, we've seen, I think, data showing an increase of about, 3 times an increase in the amount of inbound communication we get, whether it be through customers or through salespeople, right? I mean, there's any number of jokes about this, but the number of emails that we all get that says, in these unprecedented times, right? And immediately you switch off. You're like, okay, junk mail for that. Right. You've got to be hyper personalized. Right now, businesses, we're seeing it every day. Businesses are sort of desperate to find ways to better engage their customer, to provide a more tailored and bespoke experience. Because nowadays, the main way people get in touch with me, there's no meetings in the office anymore. I'm not going on site to our customers right now. Fundamentally, a seller or a customer's portal into me and my portal into my customers is through a Zoom, hopefully, or email, right? So you got to find a way to cut through that, right? Kind of thinking a little bit about when we're applying for jobs, right? How do I make my resume stand out, right? It's the same concept here. How do you hyper personalize using real-time intelligence? How do you have an email that clicks into what they want? So just for example, here you can see up on the screen, I've got something that says, Instacart has X amount of budget. They just hired a new VP of X, Y, and Z. And what that might tell me is, okay, I'm not just going to hit, in this example, Instacart with my sort of standard communication around, hey, have you thought about using this part of our product? What I realized based on sort of some of the personalized data I have about them is, okay, it looks like they just got additional funding for something, or they have additional budget that's been freed up. They just brought on a new executive. Data shows that actually most new executives in their role spend like 70% of their budget in like the first 3 months of being in the new job, right? So that, okay, now is the moment where I need to run my play. Now is the moment where I need to reach out and drive that engagement. So again, thinking about being personalized, not just on, something as basic as, oh, okay, well, the industry or the segment, but you're thinking about what's really going on there. And again, that real-time intelligence that helps you personalize your outreach and communication is going to sort of enhance your account engagement, and it's hopefully gonna drive better conversations and outcomes with your customer. Real quick, taking action on buying intent signals. So, this is kind of I think a pretty hot space actually, and one that sort of, up until joining ZoomInfo, I didn't realize just how powerful this was. And I raised my hand and say that, that was an area of ignorance for me, but buying intent signals. So the idea that, if I have a product, and if you're running your website well, and you've got a SaaS product and you're looking analytically there, you know what's going on in the four corners of your website, right? I know who's hitting my website. I've probably got IP tracking, things like that. But essentially, I know what companies are hitting my website. I know what pages they're looking at. I know, what little kind of demos they're looking to click on. And I'm constantly gathering that data, and that's fantastic. And within my product, I know where they're clicking, what they're doing, what they're not doing. You've got all sorts of metrics now, daily active usage, monthly active usage, daily active usage over monthly active usage. You have all these metrics that you're going to use, hopefully, to kind of steer and guide your business and understand and interpret what success means, or what the good looks like. But that's all within the four corners of your website, and that's all within the four corners of your product. Now, I think we can all acknowledge, we are all buyers in terms of ourselves as consumers. We can all acknowledge that I don't only go and look at the company's website if I want to research the thing that I'm trying to buy, because I understand that is probably a slightly biased market viewpoint based on only what they're willing to talk to me about. So really what I want to do is take a look at the company's website, right? But I'm also going to go to sort of the broader business to business web, so that I can educate myself, hopefully from, in a more holistic and comprehensive way, using objective sources that are going to provide me with, comparators to competitors, comparators, alternatives, things like this, right? So right now, unless you've got some mechanism of looking at the buying intent signals of your customers, you're going to be blind to some of that. So here you can see it's a very sparse graph. But what you can see is this might be a customer, and it might show me that, hey, I have an API management tool in this example, top left there. I'm noticing that sort of my customers' sort of standard level of interaction in the business web around API management solutions is humming along at whatever index number that is. And here you can see around sort of April 12th and April 26th, a big spike. And then at the beginning of May, it spikes up again. So it's telling me that this particular customer is out there consuming content, whether it be through the Wall Street Journal or a car review website, whatever it is that my product is. And in this example, API management, I know they're out there consuming data around API management. Now that could be a great thing. It might show me that there's additional opportunity to engage them in some products that I might have, or that they don't realize that I have, or that they're not using, but that they should be. Or it's a signal saying, hey, am I at risk of churn here? Are their eyes wandering towards other potential solutions? How can I try and get ahead of that? So again, this is an example of, I think, some fairly complex data. And this isn't something that obviously everyone has at their fingertips in an automated way, like what's on the screen, but you can still run this sort of play by, in a manual way. You can still be asking kind of questions. You can still be trying to kind of, when you're speaking with your customers, understanding what matters to them. What phone calls are you making right now? Like, what's on your mind, right? There's all sorts of, plays that you have in QBRs, health check-ins that sort of speak to trying to understand where your customers' sort of mindset is at, what they're interested in, and if they have if they're in a buying sort of motion, what those intent signals look like. So this is, again, another really key piece of data that we use at ZoomInfo, but that I think isn't just restricted to sort of, if you have a system that does this. Obviously, if you do, it helps. But nonetheless, I think the philosophy and sort of the tactical approach behind it still holds true regardless. And then finally, before I stop yabbering and opening it up to questions, health scoring models to mitigate churn and identify opportunity. I mentioned at the top of the deck that we could spend a whole hour on this topic alone. I've sat in sessions where this has been the front and center topic. But really, I'm going to try and kind of cover this to the extent that we say there's sort of firmographic information around our customers. That is to say, things like what we think about ZoomInfo, employee headcount, right? User headcount, industry, geography. These are things that are firmographic, right? Intrinsic elements of our customers' sort of profile. Then there's the technographic piece that says, okay, what are they doing, from a tool perspective, right? What are the things what are the systems they're using? What are sort of what are the challenges they're trying to solve, and sort of what are the platforms or the mechanisms that they're using to solve those tactical challenges. And then finally, behavioral usage data, which is going to obviously serve to tell us about how they interact with the product. So all of these things should, in an ideal world, factor in to your churn model. Now, some people sort of will say, okay, well, NPS is the North Star. Well, sometimes, right? But the net, I think the spirit of this slide, and you've heard it before, no doubt, is that it's a tapestry, right? NPS is a factor, but it's probably not the only factor. Your sort of quarterly pulses or health checks, or your monthly pulses or health checks, probably a factor. Usage is probably a factor. Are they in their first year of renewal? That's probably a factor. What's their spend threshold? Another factor. So the number of variables that you can plug into any type of churn model is fairly innumerable. And again, up to you as an organization to determine which ones are the most impactful, right? Maybe you have a product that says industry does not matter at all, so not a factor, right? Maybe you have a product that says, daily usage, if you're, an Airbnb, daily usage isn't a big thing, right? Because I know that it's really kind of high value, sort of intermittent transactions. So all of these things you should weight differently and think about how that generates a churn model. One of the things that we think about, and I'll just give you an example as kind of potentially, hopefully, a tactical sort of tidbit or takeaway would be, assuming for one of the things we think about with churn is we'd say, okay, what's the segment? All right, high level, what's the segment? Great. Within that segment, what's the spend threshold, right? Is this one of our enterprise accounts that's growing fast and looking to do more with us? Or is this an enterprise account that maybe has kind of bought the solution, they're really pleased with it, and they're kind of in a stasis mode right now? So, those two things alone impact how we think about, risk or likelihood to churn, right? Underneath that, we might think, okay, is this their first year of renewal or their second year of renewal? Because you might find, based on your business, that first year renewals churn at a higher rate, or second year renewal churns at a higher rate. Maybe you've got a product that really pops in year one, and then the challenge is thinking, how do I keep demonstrating value in year 2, 3, and 4? Maybe you've got a product that adoption is always the challenge, and you get that risk in year one, right? So thinking about tenure of a customer, maybe that plays a factor. All of these, those are just sort of 3 or 4 facets that will, for us, we will key off of and start saying, okay, well, this is the churn risk, this is the health grade, right? Usage then comes into it, right? So all of these things are things that we would factor in and try and sort of essentially weight and say, this means that someone is, an A grade, B grade, C grade, D grade, or 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 or whatever rating scale you choose to use. But ultimately, just trying to sort of think, more than just the anecdotal piece, right? More than just sort of the purely quantitative piece in the NPS, but thinking and drilling down. And as you think about trying to sort of, if I gave you 100 customers, or if I took 100 customers from your customer base and said, they aren't probably all the same. So what makes them all different, right? And as I said, it could be industry, it could be segment, it could be employee count, it could be spend threshold, it could be usage, it could be, first year, second year renewal, the amount of product add-ons they're using, right? If you've got a data credit model, the amount of data credits they're consuming, the number of searches or exports, all of these things that are business specific that you would say delineate client A from client B from client C. And if you can start to sort of really distill your client base down to its constituent factors that make each of them different, and then start to try and coalesce them into sort of actionable cohorts, you can then start to try and say, okay, these are the criteria that I'm attributing to each, or these are the sort of attributes of each cohort. And then just start tracking it with data. Start saying, okay, I've identified customer A, B, and C as high risk. I'm predicting that they would churn based on some of those factors I talked about. Well, come renewal, see what happened. And then collect the data, and then store the data, and then action the data and say, okay, you know what? Those things that I thought would really indicate churn, none of them churn. So I need to iterate on that, right? Or versus, no, absolutely, that churn. And then start to try and isolate your variables. Was the reason your churn prediction was so accurate, was it because you really nailed it on that first year renewal question? Or is it because it was the industry that was a thing? Or are you just seeing higher churn in this particular customer segment? So try and distill and isolate your variables. And that way you can keep iterating and coming up with a more predictive churn model for your business. So I've covered a lot, and I've moved through a decent clip. And at this point, you're probably tuning out to the sound of my voice. So I don't think I've taken a breath, but I did want to kind of pause for a moment, open it up to questions, and give folks a chance to kind of to dig in a little bit or make suggestions. I'm absolutely happy to field any questions that you all might have at this point. So I'll open it up to the floor.